There are so
Yes,
many people that are in marriages and they'd like to get out. But what you were talking about before, where they're on different playing fields, whether or not one spouse all of a sudden came into a lot of money, they fall out of love, there's infidelity involved. A lot of people I know have stayed in marriages because they don't have any options. They haven't had a job in 15 years. They don't know what
terrible.
they're going to
Yeah.
do. What would your suggestion be to people like that? They don't have money to get a lawyer and they don't know what their options are because they feel so stuck.
That's a real problem. And if it's a question of one spouse having control over the money, but there is a marital estate that's significant,
Mm-hmm.
there are lawyers who will say, borrow that initial retainer and I'll subsidize the case for a while. I'll make an application to the court to get you legal fees,
Mm-hmm.
but they will have the opportunity to have representation. A lot of people are comfortable in their lives. They have the country club membership. They go to lunch. They can go out with friends.
Mm-hmm.
They come home to a miserable marriage.
Mm-hmm.
But they've made the decision that I'd rather do that than now fend for myself.
Right.
But in a lot of cases, if you're going to get a distribution of assets, that divorce could be very liberating.
Yeah.
And it's not just a negative. It could also be a very big positive for women in particular. I mean, I've had women who just having the emotional freedom has given them their lives back. So in very controlling relationships, where they have no say, they're minimized, they're marginalized, and they're so disrespected in their marriage that their whole personality just crumbles.
Right.
And then as they pursue divorce and they find out what the marital estate actually consists of. I had a client who used to shop at Walmart. She lived in a beautiful house in Greenwich, Connecticut. She used to shop at Walmart and TJ Maxx thinking that they had really very little money. When she decided to pull the trigger and get divorced, she found out that the marital estate was $75 million.
Oh my God.
She had every single expense was monitored.
Oh.
And to see her now, the freedom that she has, what she can do, it's like you gave this person a whole new life.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing. A lot of people really don't know what their financial circumstances are.
Right.
And it's really important for people to partner up early. Don't be blind. Don't put your head under the sand. When a statement comes in, don't say, here, honey, your statement came in. Open it up.
Right.
See what's there. Educate yourself as to what you have.
Right.
And to me, that's one of the most important things, because that makes your relationship important and powerful. You're on equal level playing field. You're not like this.
Yeah.
And so you deserve respect, and you should gain the respect, and you should assert yourself.
Right.
So educate yourself.
Right. I agree with you. All right, let's talk about prenups for 1 second. I mean, listen, I've been married a couple times. And I have found.
What's that like? I'm dying to know.
Well, we'll get into that in a second because I want to talk about New York law as opposed to others, what we sort of talked about earlier. But with prenups, I have found that they do not hold water.
So that's not true.
Okay, so tell me about it. What did I do wrong?
That's not true at all. Look, there are key components. You have to have representation. Each of you have to have an attorney. You can't share an attorney.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have full disclosure of all the assets. You have to have an opportunity to review the agreement, not last minute. And it has to be a fair, reasonable agreement without unconscionable terms.
Mm-hmm.
If you meet all those elements, the court is going to uphold that agreement.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it's a bad agreement, everybody's entitled to make an agreement as long as they had counsel, disclosure, and opportunity to negotiate. You have the right to make a bad agreement or a good agreement. But the courts are inclined most often to enforce an agreement as long as those terms have been met. Where they don't is if it's unconscionable.
Mm.
And what does unconscionable mean? It means shocking to the conscience. So where a woman marries a man who's worth $20 million, and he said, you're waiving your rights to my business, you waive your rights to the marital home, you're waiving your rights to support, you get $25,000 for every year that we're married, capped at $1 million. Against or capped at 500,000. She has no ability to earn money. She waives support against his massive amount of wealth in a long-term marriage. A court's going to say, wow, this is patently unconscionable, not unfair, but unconscionable, because she leaves the marriage with $75,000, $100,000, a minimal amount. We're not going to enforce that agreement. The courts like, as a matter of public policy, to enforce private agreements among parties, as long as they were protected.
Right. So the experience that I had was, and again, we're not talking about anyone that was worth $20 million, but the issue was with the wording. And I'll just tell you what one part of it was that my daughter, who was very young at the time, as she got older, I put her in private school and he was supposed to pay for the school. And because the judge didn't, he didn't want to pay for it now. And the judge felt that the wording wasn't specific enough, even though it really stated it in there, but they were able to argue something. And so it ended up being what the judge came down with was that unless it was proven that I had 12 years of finances in my bank account, enough to pay for private school, she could not go to private school because he, was saying that he didn't have enough money for it, which I thought was crazy.
So that's drafting, right? And the art of drafting is critically important.
Okay.
I was just helping somebody who lives down in Miami, who's represented by counsel, and she said, could you just eyeball this and tell me if this is a good stipulation? And I read it. And it had so many openings. It had, like lingering. And I said, well, what happens if this occurs? What happens if that occurs? None of those things are defined in the agreement. And practicing law is the art of drafting. And it's very specific and it's very nuanced. And if you don't write it correctly, there's no opportunity to interpret. It has to be very clear. Once you open the door for an opportunity for interpretation, it's a 50-50 risk.
Right.
And when you have a contract, you want it sealed. And so drafting becomes really, really important. And prenuptial agreements are complicated. They're not simple agreements. They're agreements where, for example, you define what's separate property, what's marital property. If you don't have a prenuptial agreement, but you come into the marriage with separate property, what you're exposed to is if your separate property grew over the marriage, your spouse can claim that appreciation is marital. So I'll give you an example. If you came into the marriage, Rachel, with a bank account, it was yours. You had it for many, many years, and it had a significant amount of money. It was a brokerage account. And the man that you married was a trader. He said, you know what? Let me manage this account. I'll make it go up in value. But it was your separate property. And it goes up exponentially. If you had a prenup agreement, your agreement would say, my separate property and any appreciation in value, even if contributed by you, will remain my separate property. If you don't have a prenup, then your separate property, what you came into, gets valued as of the date of marriage. But if it went up in value as a result of the direct contribution of your spouse, he or she will make a claim that there's a marital component and ask for a percentage of that appreciation. So prenups can be very important. but drafting them meticulously is even more important.
Yeah, that's great advice. There are so many people that I know that when right before they get married, they are given a prenup and they're so offended or their family is offended that it actually ends to the marriage not happening. So in your opinion, do you think it's just really important to have one, or do you think that's preemptively saying, I don't believe this marriage is going to really work?
It gets very complicated and it gets to be a very ugly situation because these people are getting married. They want to move on with their lives. But if one of the parties comes from an extremely wealthy family and insists on a prenuptial agreement, and the other spouse, the spouse to be, refuses to sign and said, I find it so offensive. I don't want your money, but I don't want to sign a prenup. The family is going to put a lot of pressure on that family member not to get married.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because there's a lot of risk. This couple didn't earn the money. It was earned by other people.
Right.
Right? And so I do believe that money that you earn during the marriage should be marital. It should be a marital partnership. But money that was gifted or that you inherited or that you came into the marriage should remain your separate property, including the appreciation. It's unfortunate when that happens, and it's actually very heartbreaking because the couple could really be in love and very happy, but you have outside forces
Mm-hmm.
that make it impossible.
Right.
But it's happened.
Yeah.